Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the GovComms Festival and our focus on teams and team building. If you didn't catch my opening keynote address, and it is available if you want to go back and take a look, I made the case that digital transformation in government is the single greatest opportunity for government communicators to escape that traditional positioning as under-resourced, unimportant function to a position of strength and leadership where we can become the team leaders and the team builders who not only drive strategy, but draw together the necessary skills in an organisation that will help to ensure that digital transformation delivers on its promises of better services and experiences for citizens. For digital transformation to stick, it needs information technology, behavioural science, stakeholder engagement, data science, research, and systems thinking all to come together with communication in a harmonious, effective capability that delivers value for business areas. And these teams don't just magically stand themselves up. They require vision, they require direction and teamwork. But it's my firm belief that communicators can be the people who bring it all together. Well, joining me is someone who knows a thing or two about building and sustaining high-performing teams. Eddie Jones is the head coach of England's Rugby Union team. A matter of weeks ago, he delivered England's third Six Nation trophy in 5 years. He coached England to last year's Rugby World Cup final and is indeed the most successful coach in England's history. He has a storied coaching career, coaching in Australia, Japan, and he helped South Africa to World Cup success as an assistant coach. Now, this might seem a little odd, but my hobby away from working in government communication is in fact working with Eddie Jones to build and sustain high-performing teams. It's a long story and I won't go into it, but our collaboration goes back well over 20 years and we've enjoyed many challenges over the years about how do you get people to come together in order to achieve agreed outcomes. In fact, during the first COVID-19 lockdown, when Eddie was living in a hotel room in the Tokyo Hilton, we spent a few weeks codifying what we believe is that process to build and sustain a high-performing team. He joins me on Zoom from London. Eddie Jones, welcome to the GovComms Festival.
Hey, Pemby, all right, mate?
Yeah, very well, thanks, mate, and congratulations on the Six Nations victory. Certainly, when you run teams, it's great to achieve goals.
Well, I think you always got to try to have some success along the way, but you never really are successful. That's probably the thing that I'd emphasise the most. You're always just on a route to trying to get a little bit better all the time. And if you try to get a little bit better all the time, you get a few wins along the way.
But if to be successful or to get a little bit better along the way, and if we just go back to sort of the principles of building, high-performing teams, you've got to have a direction, don't you? You've got to set people off in a direction so as that they actually know where they're headed to.
100%. I think that's the most important thing, that you know where you're going and then you build a story about how you're going to get there. And with that becomes the characters you need, the factors that are going to be important to get you where you want to go.
So how hard is it when you're trying to define that future state? How difficult do you think that part of the process is in trying to describe to team members just exactly where you want them to go?
Well, because I have a fairly simple job coaching rugby teams, usually you only get a job coaching a team when the team's been failing. So there's an immediate goal in front of you of how you're going to be successful. But then building that greater picture to sustain success is the most difficult part, I think.
And how do you go about trying to define that, though? What are some of your processes that you go through in trying to understand what that future state looks like?
We'll always look at the current environment, look at what the environment in the future could be, look at the present resources, look at the resources in the future, the mindset of the society or country, how they think. So I always try to work out what's absolutely non-negotiable in that organisation or that country, and make sure that we've got those values embedded or living in the organisation, and then you've got that gap between where you are and where you want to be, and prioritising the areas that are going to shorten the gap as quickly as possible.
How hard is it to identify those contextual pieces that are important to building that story and understanding the people? Are they easy to locate, or does it take time to find the right and the most critical elements that go into building the team?
Some places are obvious, and I think, you know, as you said, I've been lucky enough to have you working with me. That gives me that wider context sometimes, where I'm looking at the smaller context. So being able to bring the small and the wider context together, I think, is also important. But sometimes it's really obvious. Like when I coached Japan, Japan had been underperforming, unsuccessful team that was happy with their current state. And we painted this picture that if this Japan team wasn't successful, rugby could be a dead sport in Japan. So we built a lot of emotion through that, created a Japan way, and the players really gave everything they could, and even more than they ever thought they could. And we got the results accordingly. Some other countries is a bit hard. England, for instance, is much more complex. You know, I've never coached such a diverse group of players. We've got players who are literally being brought up in a state, you know, which would be the Housing Commission in Australia. You know, not two coins to scratch together. And then we've got players who've only lived life at the high end, and trying to find a common goal for those guys has been more difficult. And I don't think we've actually got it now, but we're moving towards it, which is a good thing.
But then how do you keep shaping that direction? How is it that you keep sort of finding the insights that help you to get better, that help you to build that the clarity around the picture, but also then the connections between the people?
Well, I think one of the things always as a leader is to surround yourself with people that are smarter than you. So you get a lot of different messages. And don't surround yourself with people who are homogeneous. Surround yourself with people who have different ideas. So then you're just looking for little pockets of information that can help move you along the way. Yeah, for instance, I got an email last night from this crazy sports site that has worked for me for a long time from New Zealand, just saying, you know, you've got this and this to work on. Have you looked at this? And just a completely different approach. So you're looking for that bits of information everywhere, and then the job of the leader is to put that together into a coherent message for his team.
And that habit of gathering insights from many different sources, how have you built that habit over time? And how do you know who to listen to and who not to listen to? Or is that something that you never get right, that you're always just taking in loads of information, and just with time you get more experienced and therefore you can make better decisions?
Well, I think, you know, I don't know what it is, but the being able to be discerning is important. Yeah, and generally I think in terms of your support staff or your people you take advice from, you know, you can never go past character. I think if they're good characters, generally you'll find that they'll do a good job for you. So I would say that character is the number one thing you're looking for in terms of your support staff.
But then, obviously, you being the leader, you have sufficient humility that you don't think you know everything. Like, you've had enormous success in your career, but you're still hungry for information, hungry for knowledge.
Yeah, look, we had a lovely dinner the other night with Roy Hodgson, who's coached England, Switzerland, Sweden, coached the major clubs in all around Europe. He's currently the manager of Crystal Palace. He's 73. He's still going. 73. Imagine doing that. And he came to dinner and he said, "Look, boys, I don't know if I got too much to tell you. I'm still trying to become a good coach." and that's how I think you've got to be. And you can see that in all walks of life. I think that people who are thirsty for knowledge, who want to keep learning, who want to keep meeting people who've got more knowledge than them, and then being able to actually be practical and put that into practice is the key. Because today, as you were speaking about, the information around the world is unbelievable. The range and amount of information. Every day you open up your computer in the morning, you've got a new sports psychology book from Amazon. There's business books. There's so many different pieces of information that you've got to be able to pick out what's useful and what's not, have trusted confidence, and make sure you keep to the plan.
So you get the vision right, you get the context right, you get the characters of the people around you who are going to support you, but ultimately you have team members. So in your case, you have players. If you're in a government communications team and you're a leader, you have staff. How do you get the best out of those people? How do you get them to turn up every day to give their very best in pursuit of the vision that you've set?
Well, I think that's changed a lot over the years. Before, I think you could run a team through your own energy, your own vision, and your own enthusiasm. There was that you follow me type situation. That's morphed into, say, my situation now. I reckon when I first started coaching, 90% of the time I was at the front of the room, and now it's probably 10% of the time. And the other 90% I'm guiding, cajoling, counselling other people to do it, because that's the way the generations are changing, and it's a good way to change, I think. So how do you get them excited about it? Make sure you understand their identity, what they think they want to be, how do they want to be perceived. Make sure they understand you're doing everything you can to make them the best they can be. Make sure they understand you care for them, and then make them understand that their identity will be improved by being part of a team, because the team will give them stuff that nothing else can give them. And that's the hard bits.
The hard bit is getting the individual, or is it the hard bit that you've got to be different for every single person? So there's a complexity in every person, but it has to be an individual task as well. You can't treat anybody, no two people are the same, and therefore you have to invest time in each individual.
Yeah, well, I think that just that whole process become a lot more complex. There was a lot more players before because of the generations. Like, if my father walked in the room, I'd immediately stand to attention in a figurative way and be in awe of him. Now we know that's not the case anymore. The way generations have changed, and we know generations are different. So you've got to work harder to get them to fit into that team, and get them to understand the team is the most important thing, because they all want to be the most important person in the world.
But that being the case, how do you then deal with them individually to put the team ahead of their own particular interests?
Well, you've got to spend time with them. You've got to know them, but you don't have to know the ins and outs of them. You've got to know what makes them operate, what makes them motivated. Like, we had a boy on the weekend who was going really well, elevated himself to the leadership group, been training really well, overcame adversity, but is expecting a baby during the week, and he struggled to cope with the stress of his partner having a baby and playing the game. And we didn't know him well enough to observe that with him, and as a result, he had a very poor game for us on the weekend. But it was a great learning for us that you've got to be so diligent in your observation, and you've got to have the staff around you that has a range of skills to pick up information, because getting people to perform at their best consistently is about is about finding out what they need to have. Not what they want, but what they need to have, which is a big difference.
And so in that, how much time does that take? Does that take a lot of your time? Would you say that's the majority of your time is spent trying to understand what your players need?
I would say it takes up the majority of times. Like the tactical side's pretty easy, mate. You know, rugby's an easy game. You got to get the ball from one end of the field and score points. It's not that hard. But getting players to do it as an orchestra, which is what you see, and I'm sure it's the same with any company or organisation. When everything's going well and everything's moving together, it looks like the world's best orchestra. You know, everything's in synergy. Everyone's moving together. Everyone's thinking the same at that particular point, and that's what you're always trying to achieve. So to get to that, the leader has to drive it, but he has to have people around him who can support him. So some players, I'll leave the bulk of those conversations to assistant coaches, and I'll generally take on the harder cases, the ones that are a bit more, you know, in every organisation you'll have a slippery eel that you can never pin him down. Yeah, I used to have a chairman at the school I worked at. He said, always look out for the smoke and mirrors. And it's so true, you know, and they're the difficult ones, but they're the ones who generally got some unique ability about them. And to get those people into tune, then you know your team's got a chance of really going well. Because in any team you'll have the 80%, the bulk of the people will work pretty hard. You know, you've got the 10 or 15% at the top that are really high performers, and that bulk of the 80%, what you've got to try to do is move that normal curve to a positive slant. And then you've got the bottom 10% who you've got to make sure they don't cause damage. You know, and that's consistent in any team.
And so tell me, how important is it then to have success and to celebrate success as you're starting sort of to make movement and progress towards your goals?
I think really important, mate, because that just reinforces what you're doing is right. And success can take different forms. You know, for us, we can get beaten in the game, and we can pick out bits of the game. For instance, the first game of the Six Nations, we lost badly to France. But in fact, in terms of the metrics of the game, we probably won 60% of the metrics. But the 40% on that day of those metrics were more important than the 60%. So we did a hell of a lot of things right, but we didn't do the things right that won us the game. So you've got to be able to sell that as success for your team. Otherwise, like in any walk of life, if you lose, you get disappointment. Disappointment leads to people getting disillusioned, and therefore their work ethic and their commitment to the team drops off.
And so to be able to communicate that, though, you had to have the transparency of knowing what a good performance looked like. So you had to have the data that then enabled you to shape the story in such a way that while it was a loss on the scoreboard, it was in fact a positive in terms of the team's performance. How important is it to have that understanding of what it is that you're doing in terms of knowing the benchmarks that you need to be reaching towards?
Yeah, I think this is probably one of the most intriguing areas of performance now. That there's so much data out there. You've got data on everything, and everyone can measure something. And you know, people always say you got to be able to measure it, and you do. So measurement's important. Understanding what are the key metrics, and again, you need people who are smarter than you to be able to do that. There's that great story about Moneyball, where the whole reason they got people out of Harvard University or Stanford University were they were smarter than the guys they had. You know, they were able to see baseball for what it was, not what they thought it was. And that's the key thing. So you get those smart people in, but then you've got to be able to have the intuition and the instinctiveness of the business or the industry to understand how that all fits together, because science can tell you so many things, as we're seeing with this coronavirus. They can tell you so many things, but they can't tell you about human behaviour. And And so that's where the leader and his team are so important in observing, in understanding how you put those metrics into place.
So in terms of then, overcoming sort of adversity and setbacks, how do you deal with that? How do you keep momentum in a team when it's not performing, when it's perhaps missing its mark, when it's not quite right? You might be running a few experiments, or you might be taking a few additional risks to try to take yourself to the next level. But then how do you deal with that sort of no man's land that you might find yourself in at times, where you might have a view as the leader as to where you're going, but you're not quite getting it out of the team because whatever it is that you're trying to get across hasn't quite connected with where they are?
I think you've got to look at those periods as the best opportunity. That's where you really prove yourself. Yeah, and to me, that's a bit the leader's ego comes in. That's where I want to show that I can turn this team around with, doing all the processes we're talking about. But that's the hardest bits. Like, I hate these periods now when everyone's telling us we're good, we're on the cusp of something great, and we know we're not, because we're one step away from failure, and having that understanding keeps you on the edge. But I love those periods where things aren't going quite right, and you've got to try to work out how to get back on the front foot. And it takes a lot of courage, it takes a lot of commitment, and a lot of clear thinking. One of the things I've learned, Pemby, which is why I'm down in this lovely spot south of London now, is that as soon as you've had a win or a loss, give yourself some thinking time. Don't stay in the race. Get out of the race for a little bit. I've got a book here and paper here that I'm going to scribble all day, but free from the rat race. And I think that's really important. And that skill of reflection, I think, is being lost in the world to a great degree, because people spend so much time on their phones, so they're always in it. They're never away from it. You look at players now, so they go away, and I was looking at one of the young guys in our dressing room, and I said to one of our older guys, have a look at this. We were 5 minutes off the game. He's on his phone. He's looking at Instagram. He's looking to see, what they've got of him. It's an important part of our world now, but we need to understand, and particularly as a leader, that you've got to escape that and give yourself some time to reflect, plan, think, and look where you can go.
And so with that, will you think, plan, experiments? Will you now look and think, okay, I'm now going to try, X and Y because I've identified a weakness, and therefore I'm not going to bet the house on it, but I'm going to start to implement a few, test and learn experiments that are maybe going to pay off for us a little bit further down the track?
Yeah, no, without going into too much detail, we've got 2 major experiments running at the moment, which you didn't see any of on Saturday, so it's still a hidden secret. But it will come out in some time. But yeah, I think that's important too, to have, people talk about innovation, but to always have a proportion of your working time aligned or set for projects in the future. So keep people looking ahead, because you can't be in the day all the time. You have to have people looking ahead for you. And sometimes that's the leader's job, or you might be lucky enough to have a creative department to do that.
So in terms of that listening, though, again, it sort of gets back to it, is that you've got to listen to improve, don't you? So a key part of your strength is listening.
Yeah, I think so. But you can always get better at that. And I think you look at most people, as soon as they get under stress, what goes? They're listening. And it's been proven time and time again. So you've got to work out, particularly when you've got having relationships with staff, you'll find one of their biggest problems usually is listening, because they feel under pressure, and they're trying to work out what the next answer is before you ask the question. So they never get it right. That you've got to find some way to make them feel good about themselves, a bit of edge around, but feel good about themselves, and then they will develop a listening skill. Yeah, I always my assistant coaches always suffer initially, unfortunately, a bit of a listening problem, and because they feel under pressure. Because I only want to have the best. I'm not interested in anything under the best, and sometimes people come in with different standards, and so that first period of time is important. And I think we all go through a period where our listening drops off, and I reckon listening almost runs parallel with success and failure. That you tend to listen more when you fail, and you tend to listen less when you're successful. And the signpost is, as soon as you've got some success, work harder on your listening.
So listen, a couple more questions before I let you go. Continuous improvement, incremental improvement. Coming out and thinking that you're going to make these huge gains, particularly when you're operating at that highest level, often they're very hard to find, those transformational pieces. But really, transformation can come through incremental improvement and continuous improvement and keeping people focused. How best do you find that you can motivate your people to continuously get better? What are some of the things that you do, to set people in the right direction so that they're always looking for those small parts that they can add to their work practice that is going to contribute to the greater good, but also contribute to their own benefit, as you said, the identity that they have?
Oh, I think one of the things is, and I was reading an old business book. I was rereading an old business book by Jack Welch, the General Electric CEO. And one of the things that struck me, he said, you should never have 6 monthly, 3 monthly, yearly reviews. That reviews should be done consistently, because you should be reviewing your staff consistently to get improvement. So looking for those little improvements all the time. What are you doing now? What could you do a little bit better? How can you look at this in a different way? And they can take the form of a sit down over a cup of coffee. They can take the form of a conversation in the corridor. So those formal meetings, I think, obviously they are important for a salary aspect, but for actually improvement, it's got to be done on a daily basis. And you've got to be chalking up wins when you've had a win celebrated. You see those places that ring bells. You can do anything you want to do, but make sure you celebrate it and make sure that the people know that they've improved. I just a little one. There was one of our players is aspiring to be a leader, and he hasn't got quite the gravitas to do it. But I just had a little opportunity on the bus. I just went up to him, sat down to him, and said, "Mate, some really good leadership moments on Saturday. Do you remember that? Write them down and bring them back on Thursday when we get together." So you can continually be reinforcing that with people, and those little opportunities are the golden opportunities. There's that great story about Wayne Benton. Someone said to him, the Brisbane Broncos coach, he said, the bloke said to him, "You don't have too many formal meetings, Wayne." He said, "No, I have 7,000 a day." and that's the truth. That's the real nitty gritty of getting improvement.
And one final question before I let you go. I observed the other day on one of the videos that they're doing on the England team at the moment, when you were coaching, the players went through a particular drill and you could see something, but your first tendency was to not so much say what you saw, but it was, what did you see? You were asking the players, you were asking the people in the drill what they saw, what was good, what wasn't good, what was their reflection on it. And that's seemed to me to be the way that you were coaching them, that you were coaching them really to coach themselves and coach each other.
Yeah, no, again, I think that's something that's changed. If Joe Roth was here, he probably wouldn't say I used to coach like that at the Brumbies. But it's been an evolution. I think the more you can get people to coach themselves, the better. And that's about, again, trying to get them to think about where they are, where they need to go, continually either prodding them or praising them about what they need to do. And the younger guys respond better to that, because we see with young people today, parents with young kids, they very rarely have explicit discipline with them. So it's all done implicitly, and that's how they've grown up to be. And And therefore, in the workplace, you've got to use that sort of implicit coaching much more than the explicit coaching.
So before I go, and this is the last question, but do you find it exhausting or exhilarating? You know, there is so much to be done. Coaching at the highest level, enormous responsibilities. Obviously, you have the additional burden of public expectation and media expectation and organisational expectation, even the expectations of a whole country sometimes when you play. Do you find it exhausting, or do you find it that it's something that you were born to do?
Well, I wake up every morning energetic and exhausted. So it's a bit of both. Like, I wake up this morning, I can't wait to have today's work. But am I tired? Yes, I'm always tired. And the job is tiring because you never get away from it. As much as you do, you try to get away from it. But you've got to find ways again to freshen yourself up. Like I just had a 40-minute aerobic session and a nice steam bath, and I feel like, I'm ready to go. But the job does weigh you down, and you've got to try to break that weight every now and then. I'm sure CEOs or leaders of big company departments find the same, that you've got to find that almost as an enjoyment.
And some final advice then for people out there who are aspiring to be leaders, aspiring to get their teams to perform a little bit better. What's the brief to them as to how they can get better?
Well, again, I'm still trying to find it out myself, but know where you want to go. Make sure people know that you're trying to make them better, and make sure they know that you care about them. And making them better sometimes can be a bit uncomfortable. It's not always a nice conversation, but if they know you're going to be caring for them, then they'll give you a bit more, because we're all trying to look for that extra 10%, because no one knows what we can do. No one knows how fast people can run, how hard you can tackle, or how strategically you can think about a problem. No one knows the limit of that, and always search for that limit. Never be happy with anything less than searching for the limit.
All right. Well, Eddie Jones, thank you so much for joining us on the Leadership Series here at the GovComms Festival. Thanks for those great insights. As I mentioned before, I think there is just a massive opportunity now for government communications in digital transformation to become the leaders, to take the insights that Eddie's just shared with us, bring those to your teams, look to those wider groups, those behavioural change, the ICT, the stakeholder engagement, and bring them together into a single capability, because I think that's where we can really have an impact and we can really help to strengthen communities and improve the well-being of citizens. So good luck to you, Eddie Jones, and the upcoming Nations Cup, and thanks to you, ladies and gentlemen. We'll be back with more of the GovComms Festival in a moment.